How much do you tip? That is a question that keeps coming up as inflation rises and people start to feel the pinch in their wallets. And some restaurants are now suggesting up to 30% tips on their credit and debit machines. But the question is, how much is too much? And also on the other end, how much is too little? And that's what we're going to discuss in today's video. But before we do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And thank you to all of you who have already subscribed. I appreciate each and every one of you. And for those of you who are about to, I appreciate you as well. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's take a look first and foremost at the headlines, because this is a topic that is coming up all over North America right now, whether you're in Canada, the US. People are talking about how much you should be tipping as inflation rises and we feel the pinch in the wallet that comes along with higher prices for pretty much everything. And the articles that show up are pretty vast. You've got tipping in Canada, when and how much to tip. Now 15% is rude. Tipping fatigue hits customers. How much should I tip in Canada? To tip or not? I mean, the questions are there, and many news outlets are hitting this topic fast and furiously because it is really becoming difficult to know exactly how much to tip. And if you take a look at some of the other headlines, now 15% is considered rude in some places. We've got tipping in Canada, when and how much it's appropriate to tip. Ironically, they're using the same stock photo. And then the global guide to tipping. And what's really interesting here is that in many countries around the world, places like Australia and most of Europe, tipping isn't expected. It is something that is very common in North America, but not so much in other countries. So the question becomes, how much should you be tipping? And that's what I want to discuss in today's video, because while the rules aren't hard and fast, I've got some suggestions and some tips, no pun intended, when it comes to tipping. So let's start first and foremost with the basics. The basics in a restaurant has always been you should be tipping at least 15% no matter what type of service you get. If you have a service issue at a restaurant, the remedy is not to tip zero. The remedy is to say to the manager or the supervisor, hey, I didn't get the service that I expected today. I just wanted you to know, and more often than not, they're going to do something about it. Either they'll deduct something off of your meals, maybe give you a free dessert, or maybe even offer to bring you back in sometime at no cost. But regardless of what happens and regardless of what's discounted, you should still be tipping at least 15%. Now, I had a discussion recently with a really good friend of mine where we disagreed completely. He suggested that 15 to 18% is not a big enough amount that people are going to notice the difference, or the servers are going to notice the difference when they get tipped. But I disagree, and here's why I disagree. Many restaurants require the service staff to tip out a certain percentage to management, to bartenders, to the cooking staff, and therefore if you aren't tipping at least a minimum, a server could actually find themselves out of pocket when it comes to serving your table. On top of that, that 3%, that 15 to 18% can have a pretty significant impact on how much they actually make. Because while you may think that you're tipping 15%, you may actually be tipping only 10% to the server and 5% to the rest of the house, because of the way they structure their tipping. So an extra 3% or an extra 5% can actually mean a lot for servers. Now, one thing that I think is important to note is that some places handled their tipping differently. There was an article that I pulled up today where one person who worked at a pizza shop actually never saw a single tip. And while that's illegal in some states and some provinces, the establishment in question was using the money to invest back into the business. Now, I think that's wrong, but in this case, the kid who was being interviewed made a living wage and was very happy. But that being said, I think it's fair at any given time for you to ask how tips are handled. Are they pooled? Do you get what I tip you, or does it get shared amongst others? Because that may make a difference when it comes to tipping a greater amount. If you're tipping a greater amount because your server, Casey, was amazing, well, it matters whether or not that money is actually making it to her. So that's something I think is very important to note. And I find this especially true when you look at scenarios like hotels, where you're getting things like valet parking, or you're getting luggage taken up to your room. And quite often in those cases, the tips are pooled. So while you may think giving $5 or $10 to an individual is going straight into his pocket, it may actually be getting spread out amongst a number of people. So that's important to note as well. Now, obviously, the restaurant piece, I firmly believe that 15% is the minimum. And if you have bad service, like I said, you should be dealing with the manager, not with the server, by tipping them zero. And I think that if you're in a place where you've got a really great relationship, it's not uncalled for to tip a higher amount. And while I hate it when restaurants suggest that you should be tipping 30% and make that an option on the debit or credit machine, there are cases where my wife and I will tip up to 35%, especially if we have a relationship with the restaurant. There's one particular particular restaurant in Calgary where we dine a lot, we're able to get a table at that restaurant no matter what because we always tip 30 to 35%. We want to be able to make sure that we can get a seat at that table. And by the way, because they know us so well, very rarely do they not make up for it in an appetizer, an extra drink, or a bottle of wine on our anniversary. And having that extra relationship and making sure the people who are taking care of you are taken care of is not something that I think is unreasonable. Now, what about in places that aren't restaurants? What about places like coffee shops? Well, I think it comes down to the level of the service that you're getting. So in a high service environment, let's say a coffee shop where they're hand making you a latte, I think the same rules apply as a restaurant. However, if you're just getting something out of the case and you're at a cash register, well, I don't think it's any different than going to a 7-Eleven or a Mac store and getting rung in there. If they're literally just handling the transaction, there's probably no need to tip. But if they're taking that extra step, maybe they're extra friendly or they're hand making you something or bringing it out to your table, then it is appropriate to do a little bit more. We often find that people recommend 10 to 15% at a coffee shop, 10% with a taxi driver or an Uber driver, 10 to 25% with a hairdresser or a barber, and 10 to 15% for spa services. Now, really what it comes down to is this, is if you have the means to make somebody's day by giving them a little bit extra and you feel so compelled because you got great service, then tip as much as you want. But don't be the person who doesn't tip at all unless the transaction is, like I said, literally just accepting the cash and handling the transaction and there's no other service elements involved. Because at the end of the day, tipping is all about sharing a little bit extra with the person who is providing you superior service. And while it makes up a portion of incomes at places like restaurants and is therefore important, in other scenarios, it may not necessarily be so. You have to develop your own judgment, maybe go online, look at different articles, look at different recommendations with respect to how much you should be tipping, and use your best judgment. And again, if you have the means and you have the ability at any given time to give a little bit extra to somebody who deserves it, then go ahead and do that. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video, and we'll see you on the very next one. Cheers.